Metroid Prime 4 is finally here, my dudes. And holy shit, I think I've been watching this trailer for like 200 plus different times, sniffing every single fucking detail, checking out every single little tiny crevice, every goddamn pixel for some extra drop of Metroid. Let's go over everything that we found, shall we? Let's dive right into it. Ooh, the year 20X9. Ooh, this has been used for people to speculate right now that Metroid Prime 4 is going to take place after Super Metroid. Super Metroid takes place in 20X7. Let's note, however, that the Metroid timeline is a complete fucking garbage mess, with the most consistent thing being that Zero Mission Metroid 1 takes place in the year 20X5. Every other number thrown out there has been really inconsistent, often debated, retconned, changed, flipped on over. So until we get a little bit more news and a little bit more sauce on what exactly Prime 4's story and setting is, I'm gonna say it's probably not possible that it's gonna be taking place after Super Metroid, but you never know. In general, I would assume it takes place within the normal space that Metroid Prime has generally been contained within, between Metroid 1 and Metroid 2, just to deal with the whole eradication of Metroids. If we factor in stuff like Federation Force's ending, where Sylux is hunting down Metroids, doesn't really make sense that we'd see him next once Metroids are already eradicated. Unless you take a look at the Metroids later on that he shows up in the trailer, but we'll save that for later. Let's move on. Now let's take a look at the Gunship. Many fans mightn't be able to recognize it from Metroid Prime 3, with one distinct difference. Instead of exiting from the very bottom elevator in Prime 3, she moves back to the classic opening hatch on the very top, akin to the ships in Prime 1 and 2. Why, you ask? She's gotta do a cool-ass somersault entrance, dude. Check that shit out. Now, let's switch on over and take a look at the new UI that we have through the first-person visor. One really big key new thing is the fact that the missile launcher has its own dedicated button on the D-pad. In Prime 1 and 2, generally the D-pad/C stick were dedicated to be able to switch your visors and your beams between each other. The only reason I could think of on why the missile launcher has its own dedicated D-pad button is because they're changing the way that the missile launcher works overall. Right now, I'm imagining a system that kind of looks like Legend of Zelda, where the D-pad is where you equip power-ups and certain abilities, and by pressing a button on the D-pad, you allocate that ability towards a certain ability button. By selecting the missile launcher, the ability button will be able to use missiles. But if you have another visor or another ability that you need to activate in the middle of a certain moment, you can actually bind that to the D-pad, customize it how you want, and be able to use that ability. Almost kind of creating your own loadouts in the game. It'd be pretty cool to be able to customize the ability to like intermix visors and beams on the same D-pad. Prime 1 Remaster had to kind of adapt the fact that it was dual analog controls for a lot of control schemes, so you no longer had a C-stick and D-pad for visors and beams. So they had to go and retrofit a Hold X for D-pad solution to switching between visors and switching between beams. Overall, it was kind of rough, so I could see customizable loadouts being a fantastic new quality of life feature compared to Prime 1 Remaster. We're just gonna have to see, though. That's my current prediction. Now, over here, we see Samus pull up the scan visor without needing to bring up any special UI or press the D-pad whatsoever. So now I'm thinking the scan visor has its own dedicated button on a controller that you can always bring up. This might mean the concept of visors that we mean traditionally might be dead, where its dedicated menu no longer exists and will be using a customizable loadout like I previously mentioned. Or visors could just be all gone from the game altogether. We don't know. I might dig the fact that the scan visor has its own dedicated button, so you're never quickly in a pinch trying to like press the D-pad and you accidentally held the wrong button and now you changed your beam instead of your visor, which happened a lot in Prime 1 Remaster. Too many goddamn times, dude. It's definitely a creative possible way to get around the fact that you no longer have two different inputs for visors and beams. I also do really love this cool shimmering effect that happens while you're scanning something. It's almost like the scan visor is like calculating and collecting information from whatever Samus is scanning to be able to present it to her. Kind of like its own AI working its shit in the background. And here's where we were able to get our first glimpse at the Space Pirate Giant Frigate, which borrows from the exact same design from Prime 3, akin to Samus's Gunship. This is actually a pretty cool thing because overall I enjoyed the way Space Pirate technology looked in Prime 3. I do hope that at some point we get to see those creepy-ass organic raider ships that we saw in Prime 3, the ones with the creepy-ass eyes that you could walk into, and they're weirdly organic creatures that the Space Pirates have kind of cultivated to use as a ship. But alas, all we see are these basic ass drop pods. Well, a dude can hope, can he? Let's also look at the actual Space Pirate design. It seems to be a combination of Prime 1's purple space lizard with the added mandibles that you see in Prime 2 and Prime 3's Space Pirate. Prime 2 Space Pirates were a little bit more traditional, the fact that they look like crustaceans from the 2D series. But then Prime 3 does the cool merger of kind of make them crustaceans with those mandibles, but also making them look kind of lizardy from Prime 1. Prime 4 goes for a kind of different vibe though. It's more purple space lizard with these fancy ass armor. Actually, right away when I saw these dudes, I instantly thought, are these just elites from Halo, dude? They kind of look like it. And it is kind of fitting considering that a lot of devs working on Prime 4 at Retro are actually devs that worked on Halo 4, 5, and Infinite back at 343 Industries, which in turn also had some devs that were hired from the original Metroid Prime trilogy from Retro. Kind of this weird franchise incest if you kind of think about it. And that's going to be a recurring thing that I might actually compare this game to. This game looks a lot like Halo 4 in terms of lighting, texture work, and overall visuals, which isn't a bad thing. I really liked how Halo 4 looked, but it did have a certain style to it that I'm seeing recreated in Metroid Prime 4. Now, as Samus is sleuthing around in her cool-ass morph ball, getting those neat panning cinematic shots, we see Space Pirates trying to play some Rainbow Six Siege and breach into this room. As they breach into the room, if you notice in the distance, there's a small little thing being carried away by Federation troops, almost like some artifact of sorts. Now, if you take a close look at it, you might notice the fact that it's the same exact object that shows up in the Prime 4 Beyond logo, only now you're seeing it from the back instead of the side that we see in the logo. I think this artifact's gonna end up playing a pretty big important role, considering the fact that it's in the goddamn logo. People also made the observation that the profile of the artifact that we see in the logo kind of looks like the overall image of a black hole. There's crazy theories that this game is going to have time travel, have major teleportation. I'm curious what this artifact's going to end up doing, but clearly it's important. Oh, speaking of everyone's favorite game, Other M, those Federation soldiers are actually looking pretty close to the design of those guys.
Ah, fancy meeting you here, princess. Remember me?
God, I love Other M. You can actually see the Galactic Federation logo on this computer over here. Interesting. And oh, I see you over there, little energy tank. No. Gotta get that upgrade, dude. Now, let's get on over to the big baddie of the trailer, Sylux. What's really interesting is Nintendo actually provided the original scene as it's presented in the game with the audio effects alongside it. Wasn't really a big fan of the trailer's overall audio mixing, so I'm glad we were able to see this fantastic rendition of the original scene. Dude, I don't know. Sound design sounded pretty good right there. I could talk a little bit more about Sylux, but basically, he's a mysterious figure that shows up in the DS spin-off game, Metroid Prime Hunters. He also ends up showing up in the secret ending for Metroid Prime 3 at the very end. And shows up in the secret ending for Federation Force, the game that everybody played and fucking loved. Now, this badass comes bursting in through the door with a bunch of space pirates, but more importantly, 2 Metroids right behind him. But they're not actually Metroids. If one takes a closer look, you might be able to notice the fact that their red nucleus is very different from how you usually see it inside Metroids. That's because people are speculating these aren't Metroids, but in fact, Mocktroids. Metroid always loves making callbacks to previous enemy designs from other games, randomly bringing them back in future titles. Mocktroids originally only showed up in Super Metroid. However, you can actually see holograms of them over in Metroid Prime Hunters. Coincidentally, the game with Sylux. It is pretty interesting that the last time we saw Sylux, he was in a Federation base trying to steal Metroids, and now he shows up with Mocktroids instead. Almost implies that he tried getting his hand on Metroids, but ultimately failed, so he had to settle for the second best thing. Curious if they're actually gonna end up being really weak versions of Metroids that you fight in game. We've only ever fought them in Super Metroid, and they're pretty goddamn weak in that game. Pretty disrespectful of the Troid surname. And at this point, we are greeted with the Metroid Prime 4 Beyond logo, which of course we saw earlier in-game as the artifact. Pretty cool way to try to tease us about what this game could actually be about. But now, here comes possibly the greatest part of the trailer, complete with the best music, fantastic visuals, and that truth the reason why we play Metroid, to explore alien worlds, going around every corner dreading what might be through it. Now, if you stop and look at the very beginning where Samus is standing, right behind her you end up seeing a mysterious portal. Now, Metroid definitely loves to fuck around with its portals, especially Metroid Prime 2 and 3. Prime 2, the purpose of portals were to jump between light and dark aether, the big light and dark world mechanic of the game that allowed you to revisit areas with a new twist on them. Prime 3, there's only really 1 or 2 instances of using a portal in Brio, where you end up visiting a very twisted version of the planet with some unique lore, probably one of the chillest moments of the game. So it's interesting to see a portal once again in Prime 4. I wonder if it has anything tied with the artifact, or just happens to be something small like it was in Prime 3, used just for its specific setting. Now, the very last beautiful thing in this trailer. If you notice in the very distance at the end of this shot, you might be looking at the giant ass tree, which is pretty goddamn cool. But if you looked over on the left side over here, you can actually notice some sort of building and a long bridge in the distance, indicating this ain't just a jungle, dude. There's civilization over here. One thing I loved about Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3 is that on these planets, you're constantly getting an up-close and personal look at all these fallen civilizations, uncovering piece by piece the lore of why their civilization collapsed, chronicles of their tribulations, and their prophecies they laid behind. So it's cool to see Prime 4 might be going for the same direction. Now, in some shots you're able to find from the Nintendo website, we're actually able to get a slightly different view on this bridge. Could you just imagine later in game, we end up being on that bridge and we are actually able to see the area that we came from? Kind of like a cool Dark Souls 1 world building moment. God, the fucking potential, dudes. All right, after watching the trailer over and over for like 500 different times, I think I found everything worth of note. I might have been underwhelmed by certain aspects of this trailer. I gotta say though, it's goddamn good to be seeing Prime 4 once again. Now I'm curious what the next trailer is gonna be cooking. Thanks for watching my overly in-depth analysis of the Metroid Prime 4 trailer. Did I show you guys anything new? Any small details that you might have missed? Tell me about it in the comments below. I'm really looking forward to when Nintendo decides to show up trailer number 2, and hopefully it gives us a few more looks at the strange alien world. Show us why the game is called Beyond. Looking forward to the next time, Nintendo!
Mm.